Hello. Hello, welcome to the SITMA webinar. Today, we are going to be talking about implementing better mental health support in the workplace. And I have the pleasure to have here with me Graham McCartney. Graham is one of the trustees of the Jonathan's Voice charity, which is a charity very close to our hearts. It's a charity that is looking after mental health for IP practitioners, both patent and trademark attorneys. This charity was set up a few years ago after the tragic death of Jonathan, Graham's son. And Graham has very kindly offered to come to talk to us about specific tips that we could implement to make our work environment more mentally healthy. So Graham, very pleased to have you. The floor is yours.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you for that introduction. So I'm just trying to move around a little box that is showing on the screen at the moment. Thank you, Oscar. Thank you for the introduction. I really am delighted to be able to talk to you all today. And the title of the webinar, as Oscar has said, is Implementing Better Health Support in the Workplace. So I'm very grateful to SITMA for giving me the platform to talk to you all. I'm very grateful to all of you who have given up your valuable time to listen and participate, I hope, today. So there's an opportunity to ask questions by typing them in. What I would suggest you do, Oscar is going to manage the questions, and I'm very grateful for that. What I would suggest you do, though, is that please don't wait to the end to type your question in. Before I came to doing this, my day job was a university lecturer. And so in dealing with large classes, it was difficult to field questions during a lecture, and people had to wait to the end. Great thing of this technology is that actually you can be firing questions in as and when you think of them. So if you notice something on a slide, and you would like to ask a question about that specific thing, then by all means fire your question in and we'll deal with it at the end of my talk. So without any further ado, we'll move on to the first slide. He says, hopefully. Right. Okay. So the title is Implementing Better Health Support in the Workplace. And just a bit of information on the first slide about our charity. We've got a website, we've got a Twitter account, and we have a LinkedIn profile as well. So if you're engaged by what I have to say, then we'd be delighted to have you as a follower on Twitter or to link to us on LinkedIn. That would be great so that we can keep in touch with you. A brief introduction. So Oscar's mentioned how we came about. And the story tragically relates to my son, Jonathan. So Jonathan was a patent attorney in Bristol. And on the outside, things were going very well. But sadly and tragically, a month after his 35th birthday, Jonathan took his own life on the 30th of October 2017. What I've come to learn is known as an out of the blue suicide. He hadn't been talking or openly discussing any specific mental health difficulties. And sadly, very sadly, he had been masking his mental health struggles very, very well. And so shortly after this tragic event, we, his family, founded the charity Jonathan's Voice, which is now a registered charity. And we aim to promote better mental health in the workplace. And of course, what better place to start than with the intellectual property profession, because it was a profession that Jonathan loved. He joined the profession in 2005, straight out of university. He really enjoyed the challenges of being a patent attorney. And we discussed a lot about the technical challenge of his work, and it was clear that he was really engaged with that. And so we really felt that we must give something to the profession and help to make it an even better profession. So something about today's topics. Brief introduction about workplace reality when it comes to mental health. Then I'd like to say a little bit about some of the challenges for trademark professionals. I'm sure you all know what they are, but I've clearly spent a lot of time in the past few years talking and discussing with IP professionals, and I've come to gauge something about the challenges. Then I'd like to spend most of the talk going through some of the ideas that we evolved when writing a guide, which is available from our website. And that guide focuses on what we've called a 3-tier model for creating a mentally healthy workplace. And then I'd like to talk you through steps that one can take, and these are practical steps to implement this 3-tier model in the workplace. So let's just have a brief introduction. So just in general terms, and this is not specific to your workplaces or profession, but what's workplace reality in the UK? Well, from surveys that have been conducted by organisations that review and assess mental health in the workplace, it's become clear that large numbers of people who have had to take time off due to workplace stress didn't feel able to give their employer the real reason. So that's really important and really significant. And the second thing is that almost half of people still feel uncomfortable talking to an employer about their mental health. So clearly, although things have improved, there's a way to go. And that's one of the things we as a charity are trying to engage people with. So we can say that when it comes to mental health and mental well-being, we don't seem to talk about it enough. We don't always look after ourselves properly. Importantly, we don't seem to ask for help soon enough. And to a large extent, it's still the case that our workplaces aren't always sufficiently aware of the importance of addressing mental health issues. And tragically, there's still shame and stigma around mental health issues. And this is Mental Health Awareness Week, and it is really tremendous that so many people are beginning to talk more about mental health issues, but nevertheless, there still remains a shame and stigma, which is something I'm desperately trying to work with people to improve. So let me talk a little bit now about workplace stress and specifically the challenge for IP professionals. So when I've talked to people and I've tried to condense what people have said to me into a slide, so the sort of things I've heard is that a career as an IP professional is exhilarating. People are enthused and excited by the work they do. It's challenging because there are many pressures on the work. It's hard work. People work long hours. They put a lot of time into it. But people find it rewarding because of the challenges and because of the groups they work with and the teams they work with and the clients they work with. And it's always a lot of responsibility. And I think people would sum it up by saying it's a great profession, but it's never an easy profession. That many people in that profession will face challenges that can potentially harm their well-being, especially stress at work. So this has been, and we're very grateful for this, this has been something which IP Inclusive have been championing for several years, and they've conducted surveys of the profession. So the surveys were conducted in 2018 and 2019. And the information from that, I've tried to summarize for you in one slide. And there's a lot of information there, which I haven't been able to put to you in a succinct way. But they've had responses of over 600 IP professionals, which is a very significant fraction of the profession. They've looked at students and paralegals as well as professional patent and trademark attorneys. And they looked at unqualified individuals through to senior levels. So in the previous 12 months over the 2019 survey, 58% of people talked about having high stress levels, 42% talked about having noticeable anxiety, and 22% sadly talked about depression. And the main causes which were drawn out through this survey was workload, which I'm sure you are all familiar with: targets, deadlines, long hours, and maybe insufficient control over workload. As a result of the long hours, potentially conflict with home life and caring responsibilities. In some instances, and clearly there are examples of good practice and examples of less good practice, ineffective or inappropriate management and lack of support. And for qualified IPs, client demands. For students, exams were a very significant challenge and pressure. And for paralegals, the working environment and the resources. So those are a summary, a very short summary of some of the challenges. So if I can go on to that and just focus a bit on stress at work, because I think this is one of the things that has most come to the fore through these surveys. The stresses come from things like billing and performance targets, the fact that people have time-sensitive work, they have urgent deadlines from clients, the digital pressures, and the fact that the global client base in different time zones is important. And I know from my own experience talking to Jonathan, he would be having emails and requests from people on the east coast of China and Japan and Korea, and also on the west coast of America from Los Angeles and San Francisco. So the global client base certainly caused him significant challenges. Another challenge that creates stress is the tendency to perfectionism, which seems to be a trait that goes with, in broad terms, some of those who are attracted to the profession. And of course, the fear of making mistakes, the importance of getting things right. So those are all massive contributors, we understand, to stress at work. So stress itself is not classified as a mental health difficulty, but prolonged exposure to stress can lead us into anxiety and depression and burnout. And that is where very significant problems can arise. So I really like the way this curve reflects this behavior. So the graph is one of performance against the level of pressure. And we all know that we don't perform well if we have very little pressure. And that's true of us as individuals in our recreation when we're playing football or golf or tennis, of professional athletes, of all professions. We need some pressure to perform at our best. The key issue is that there's a very sudden tipping point, the purple bar, where we can go from an optimum performance and we can suddenly tip over and go into a mode of exhaustion and serious health problems and breakdown and burnout. So this is not a gradual transition. It can actually be a very sudden tipping point. And we all have different tipping points when too much pressure makes us unwell. So that's an important thing that we all must bear in mind. And we all must recognize that everyone is different. The level of pressure when one individual experiences excessive pressure is not the same for another. So it's really important that everyone knows the limits, and that is understood by the people they work with and by their line managers and so on. So that's sort of setting the scene of the environment, the workplace, and the stresses and where that can lead in terms of burnout and recovery from that. But what I wanted to really emphasize and talk about was the ideas we've developed in our guide, which we recently published. So we recently worked with another charity called the Charlie Waller Trust. And I have to give a huge amount of credit to Charlie Waller Trust, which is a long established charity in the UK, formed over 20 years ago in circumstances very similar to ours, where Charlie Waller, a young man, sadly took his own life, and his family set up the Charlie Waller Trust, which has had a huge impact in schools and universities, and now more so in workplaces. So we've been absolutely tremendously supported by the professionals in the Charlie Waller Trust in helping us produce this guide. And this is one which the second guide which we produced, And this one was directed towards advancing the mental health and well-being agenda. And the message we are trying to get across is, how do we create a properly mentally healthy workplace? So much emphasis has been on physically healthy workplaces, but what we've neglected perhaps is a mentally healthy workplace. And we've built this model around 3 levels in the triangle. Preventative, where we're creating a culture that supports good mental health. Proactive, where we're putting in place initiatives which are aimed at preventing mental health difficulties. And then the highest level, the reactive, where we're putting in place mechanisms, including the training of leaders to support individuals who may be struggling. So we should be doing the greatest volume of work at preventative, some at proactive, and hopefully the reactive level is where we're having to spend very little time. But let's see how that can evolve. So there's evidence, of course, that the highest returns on investment in mental health initiatives come from the preventative and proactive areas. Those are things that companies need to be doing and should be doing. And if they do them well, they will actually get positive returns, both in terms of their profitability, their bottom line, their ability to recruit staff, their ability to retain staff. Those are the very positive things that will come out of dealing with mental health in the right way. So let me talk a bit now about how we might go about in organizations implementing a 3-tier model, because after all, the aim of today is not for me to paint for you a series of problems. I'm sure that you are well aware of the problems that can exist in the profession. My task today is to inspire you. So it's slightly difficult, I guess, to inspire people when I'm sitting looking at a small camera and not looking at all the faces I'd like to be looking at in a real room. But we are where we are. And so what I want to hopefully do today is to inspire you all to go out and actually think about how to implement a 3-tier model in your workplace. That's the aim. The aim is to go away full of ideas, full of thoughts, and thinking, let's do it. Okay, so let's just take a breather. Let's think for a moment what we're going to do. Think about that triangle and think about how we're going to deal with each of those layers. So, tier 1, preventative. There we're trying to create a culture which supports good mental health and well-being for all staff. And this is where I'm very happy for you to start firing questions in. If you've got ideas, we did this in our company, we did that, let's share them with people in the group. If you're hoping I might have some ideas which I've not put on the slide, then put the questions in and we'll see what I can respond. So how do we create a culture within an organization, whether it's a big firm, whether it's a small firm, whether it's part of a group within a bigger organization? How do we create a culture? And the culture comes from those in senior roles who have to lead and fully back initiatives to support mental health and well-being in the workplace. So if you're got a senior role, a leadership role, then you have the power and the influence to change things. If you're able to discuss with those who are in senior roles, then you have to convince them, negotiate with them that they have such a huge and important capability to change things. And there are examples in business and everywhere of where senior leaders have really made a difference. So there is a compelling case for supporting mental health in the workplace. There's a business case, there's a financial case, and of course, it's the right thing to do. There are ethical reasons. But culture, creating the right culture, is preeminently important. It may actually call for new skills and some training and new ways of thinking about supporting staff and their mental health and well-being. But the preventive bit is fundamental. So here's some practical steps from me. Okay, so what might we do? Well, first of all, we must have an environment where we don't accept stigma, we challenge stigma, and that everyone, leaders and everyone else, becomes comfortable at listening to people and talking to people about mental health challenges. And that needs practice. It needs practice, and it needs ensuring that these things are discussed openly in the organization. Then we need to think about how in an organization we do tackle unhelpful cultural practices, and we mean it. So working long hours, we should perhaps ensure that hours are no longer than they have to be. Unrealistic deadlines, maybe we should try and manage clients' expectations. 24/7 availability, not taking holidays. These are things that organizations can look at. They can have a culture about it, and they can try and put in place the right culture. And it needs both a top-down and a bottom-up approach. It needs the top of the organization to set the agenda. In other words, ensure that they put it on partners meetings. If they have partners meetings, there's a topic, there's always an agenda item about mental health and well-being. There's a focus on it by perhaps having regular workshops, by having people coming and talking about mental health, by supporting a mental health charity through sponsored events, things like that, and review what's going on regularly. But of course, encourage good ideas from all levels of staff. So it's not only those at the top who can have the best ideas. It's a bottom-up approach as well as a top-down approach. But without putting adequate resources there, it's not going to happen. So the organization, the firm, the partnership has to commit to it, has to find out what would make a difference to staff. So would it make a difference, for example, if they had a few days off to support family if they were undergoing specific treatments or undergoing specific tests, for example, for health reasons? So what would actually support staff, make the working environment less stressful for them? Find out. Let's just not make it a top-down. Let's talk to everyone in the organization. So practical steps are things that we can discuss perhaps through people sending in questions, or even better, people suggesting what has worked for them. What else do we have in practical steps? Well, people must lead in a compassionate way. They must be empathetic to situations. There must be safety. Everybody must feel safe and able to say what they think and feel without this fear of stigma or shame. And there must be obviously this promotion of open discussion. People must be inspired with positive ideas and inspirational stories about mental health and well-being. And the preventative level should involve everyone in the organization. I think it's a bit like the Heineken advert, if I can remember it correctly. Heineken reaches the parts others don't. So cultural change should reach to all parts. And leading by example is key, because seeing is believing. It's all very well for the senior staff to say, you should have a certain working culture, you should not work 24/7, but it doesn't help if they're sending you emails about that at 10 o'clock in the evening. So leading by example is key, seeing is believing. Okay, so a number of practical steps to get this preventative platform in place. It's at the bottom of the triangle. Everything else is built on that. Now, what about proactive? How do we do things that are proactive? Because research shows that mentally healthy workplaces have more committed and engaged workers. As I said, it benefits profitability through productivity and reduced absenteeism. And it also, I believe, promotes attracting talent and early career entrance into a company. More and more people who are coming out of universities have been in an environment where supportive mental health has been important, mental health has been talked about. So actually, when they come to organizations, when they're choosing organizations to work for, I believe those people will be looking for the right culture. And I understand that recruiting and retaining qualified IP professionals is difficult. And so all firms, all partnerships, all organizations want to be able to recruit and retain the best people. So embedding well-being into your workplace doesn't have to be time intensive or costly. It actually is very effective without a huge amount of time and cost. So I realize you can't see what's on the right-hand part of this slide. It's simply a scan page from our booklet. What I'm trying to say is there are resources in our booklet which can get you started into having proactive initiatives to prevent difficulties. So I'm not expecting you to be able to read through all of those. I'm not going to go through all of those. I'm just flagging up that if you get our booklet, there's loads of resources there for you to look at. And what's surprisingly lacking in many organizations are the simple things that can get you on the road to a mentally healthy workplace. And that's a mental health policy and a mental health plan. And those don't involve huge amounts of new thinking. There is lots of things there to get you started. There's something called the Stevenson Farmer Review, which was written in 2017. It was a review supported by the government, and they identified core standards that can be the basis of your mental health policy. And you can Google or you can link from our booklet to the Stevenson Farmer Review and read those core standards. You can create a plan outlining how the mental health policy is put into action, what the resources are, and who has ownership. Okay, so you say to me, where do we find a policy? Where do we find a plan? Well, there's actually a sample policy template on the IP Inclusive website. And there's a sample plan on the Charlie Waller Trust website. And all those links are in our guide. So you're not creating something from scratch. You can start easily with something that's already there for you. Okay, so what other initiatives could you take as well as a plan and a policy and a plan to prevent difficulties? Well, there's the mental health first aid scheme. You can seek volunteers who want to be trained as mental health first aiders. That's a great step to say to your organization, we take mental health seriously. So those people can be trained professionally by organizations to do what they say. They're not psychiatrists or psychologists in your organization. They're there to support mental health. You can include mental health and well-being as a key part of every induction meeting. So if you have induction programs for staff or groups of staff, talk about mental health and well-being. Actually, I think a lot of them will want you to talk about it. Consider initiatives that would improve work-life balance. Find out what staff would make the biggest difference. It might be some small things that cost very little. Think about your performance reviews. I'm sure that all organizations have in one shape or form performance reviews. Let's embed mental well-being considerations into performance reviews. As I said, put your ideas into the chat box. I know we're not using Zoom. We use that in the same way as I might use Hoover to talk about vacuum cleaner. Sorry, I'm talking to the experts on this. I must be careful what I say. Put your ideas into the box now if you have any, and we can talk about them. And ultimately, if you need support, talk to us. You know, as a charity, we have now established ourselves, and we now have professional mental health people working with us who have experience of workplace mental health and well-being. If you're stuck, get in touch, and we can advise and we can support. We can come to your organization, we can talk to you, and we can help you through these steps. It's not rocket science. And finally, we come to perhaps the section where we hope we never have to get to, that bit at the top of the triangle, reactive. And that's how do we identify and look after the individuals who are struggling. So, you know, we could all do better to support each other through periods of mental ill health, but it can always be difficult to start a conversation. So we're looking out for one another. We're looking out for those in the office, for those who are working, those other colleagues who you see from time to time. Maybe a lot more difficult actually in COVID times, but it's important to keep an eye out and look after individuals in your organization. So how do we do it? Well, we need to choose carefully a good time and a place to talk. We need to be able to listen actively, and we need to use open-ended questions. And again, people may not feel they particularly have those skills, but we can come to you and we can do a short workshop to help people in your organization develop those skills. So reactive is the area where we hope we never get into, but where we must all keep a watching brief and keep an eye out for individuals. And it's a crucial area if we have to do it, providing support and when we should refer on. So it's really important that if we have mental health first aiders in place, we recognize their limitations, that individuals recognize their own limitations, and we can point people to various levels of support. For example, there's a wealth of general and specific self-help material. And as an organization, you can make some of that available on your intranet if you have one, or in other forms. Law Care, which is a charity which supports the legal profession, has information and a helpline specially designed for those in the legal profession. We might have to recommend that a staff member contacts their GP if they haven't already done so. Some organisations will have an employee assistance programme or an access to a counselling service. And the bottom line is, if you're acutely concerned for someone's safety, then stay with them and get help. It can be a matter of life and death. And again, this is just some screenshots from our booklet. We have lots of help and support materials there. So if you need further information, if you need useful resources, download the booklet, which is free to download, have a look at it, and put it on your intranet, make it available to your staff. However you can disseminate, that is fantastic. So let me conclude then with a few key points. What are the takeaway messages? First message is that each of us should become and has to become actively engaged in our own mental health and well-being. This is Mental Health Awareness Week. How much has changed in 3 or 4 years? A lot. Mental Health Awareness Week now receives so much more coverage, and it's important that we all as individuals reflect on our own mental health and take the right steps to look after it. Second key point is that embedding well-being in your organization doesn't have to be time intensive or costly. There's help out there. Third takeaway is that staff and senior leaders working together to tackle mental health in the workplace can and will create a better future for everyone. It's all about making things work for everyone in your organization. The fourth thing is, this isn't something that you can change overnight. It's not like painting the walls or changing the furniture. It doesn't happen overnight. But what's really important is to make a start somewhere and keep going, and change will occur. And I would say the fifth thing, if companies have the courage to challenge this is the way we've always done it attitude and the practices, then together real change can happen. We can make things happen. We can improve things for everyone. And where do we fit into all of this? Well, our aim is to help and support you create an even better profession and a mentally healthy workplace. That's our aim. So I really appreciate you taking the time this afternoon in Mental Health Awareness Week to listen to me. It would have been great to have been standing in front of all of you, but it's great that so many people have been able to sign up, tune in, and see my slides. And at this point, I'm not quite sure how the technology works, but I'd like to hand over to Oscar, who I think has been possibly fielding questions or will initiate some question and discussion. Thank you, everyone, and I look forward to talking to you, possibly in your individual organisations in the very near future.
Thank you, Graham. An excellent presentation and an excellent way for SITMA to collaborate in this Mental Health Week. Definitely, SITMA as an institute, we are very keen to make the workplace environment healthier, to have a better mental health approach. And in fact, your presentation has given already some food for thoughts. So some people have already mentioned that their own firms have mental health aiders, which is great to hear.
Great.
It's fantastic that some firms are already taking that practical step, isn't it? Another suggestion from someone in the audience was that mental health could be one of the core competencies when you are recruiting managers, right? That those have to show that kind of skills that are required to have this top-down approach that you are suggesting.
Yeah, very much so. And actually, I think the most well-known example of how a leader can change the culture of an organization is the former CEO of Lloyds Bank, who's just left and gone to Credit Suisse. But he had such a high profile because he personally suffered from stress early on in his job and had to take 3 months off and a recovery phase. And he was very open about the fact that he'd had 5 nights when he couldn't sleep, stress had built up, he was suffering severe anxiety, and he has driven and led change in Lloyds Bank and has been a very high-profile figure promoting mental health and well-being in organizations. So it is important that leaders are well aware of mental health, and if line managers can be trained as part of a competency, that would be absolutely brilliant. Yes.
Yes, I would also like to add that obviously SITMA on our website we do have a link to Jonathan's Voice, and that all the information, all this guide that you have been referring to with the tips is there. But obviously, for people in the audience, they can also visit the website, Jonathan's Voice website, to get these guides, or they can contact us, and we will provide a link with those practical steps. So you have talked a lot about one of the steps is for managers, but not only managers, everybody has to be involved. It doesn't have to be a top-down approach. It's everybody has to be involved in mental health, right? But to have open discussions, to show empathy, right? And just to talk. It's so important to talk. But it is undeniable that in the work environment, some people have concerns to be open about their problems because they might come across as not reliable. And therefore, that's why they are masking all these issues, right? And obviously, we have to fight the stigma. But how do you? The business is business, and you have to deliver. So, what advice do you give to those who actually are still masking their problems? That they don't really have that trust?
Yeah, I mean, let me say first of all, I mean, I think I really understand that situation, and I really understand it from the situation that Jonathan was in, because first of all, he was a supervisor of trainees, so clearly they looked up to him and they trusted him and they trusted his judgment. So it would have been very difficult for him to speak openly to them about the pressures and the difficulties he was under. And also he was, within a relatively short period of time, he'd become a partner and was a very senior partner in the organization. So again, it would have been very difficult, I think, for him to talk to. He was a young guy, but it would have been very difficult for him to talk to perhaps people in their 50s and 60s in the organization, and they would have wondered about his competency as a senior partner. So I really, really understand that. I think what I would say is that, sure, from my own personal situation, I can say it is important to reach out to others to get help. You know, you have to do it. And I think that the first priority is to reach out to someone, and confidential support outside the normal environment is there. and I can surely understand people's concerns within an organisation. But this is where I think mental health first aiders do have a role to play, and also mental health first aiders who are different, have different positions within an organisation. So it may be that a very senior person is happy to talk to another senior person who's a mental health first aider, bearing in mind that the key training of mental health first aiders is 100% confidentiality. But on the other hand, they may feel more comfortable talking to their sort of support assistant or their PA or something, because that individual may just have a better working relationship with them. And I think it's a judgment call as to how you do it. Or it may be you prefer to go to law care and talk to law care, or it may be you prefer to use one of these apps that are now available. And this is particularly, how do I put this delicately? This is probably a gender issue. You know, men find it, I think people would agree, much harder to talk about their feelings and so on. And I think there's evidence that there are apps available where people can actually just engage in sending messages, and men can find this a more comfortable way to talk about their feelings. So my answer would be talking is the most important thing to do. And there are confidential helplines, support services to go to. If the organisation has mental health first aiders, maybe you feel comfortable going down that route. And beyond that, there are other more innovative ways that are being employed nowadays to allow people to engage and talk about their feelings. Talk in inverted commas.
Yes. So one question that from the audience is, do you think that there are different challenges compared to larger firms compared to smaller firms? So what different approaches for mental health awareness and support?
Okay, I think there are very different challenges. Okay, I'm not involved in the IP business myself, so I would defer maybe to other comments from the audience. But looking in from the outside, it would seem to me that large firms may well be able to resource HR functions. So there may be people in the firm who are trained in professional development and management, or professional members of the Chartered Institute of Professional Development and so on, so who have a professional training and whose day job is to look after well-being as part of an HR function. So they might have a better resource to begin to set up things like mental health plans and policies. On the other hand, I know, and this is one of the things we're very keen on, is supporting small organizations where there are maybe a few partners and a few support staff. And there it may be really difficult, or they may think it's really difficult to do all of this. And I would say to them, well, you know, there are templates there for doing things. We will come and help you. So if somebody thinks we must do that, it's a challenge, because I'm busy. I'm just trying to keep my business running. I'm trying to pay the bills. I'm trying to get new clients in. I'm trying to keep the clients happy. Yeah, give us a call, you know, and say, we want to do this. Can you help us?
Yeah, that's a good answer. Thank you, Graham. So there's a question about the mindfulness business charter that some companies seems to be signing up for. Could you tell us something about that, and what are your thoughts about this initiative?
Yeah, there's something being set up recently called the Mindfulness Business Charter, and you can find it if you Google. And a number of fairly large firms, the usual sort of legal and financial suspects, have signed up to the Mindfulness Business Charter. And when you sign up to the charter, you undertake to do a number of important things and put in place a number of steps in your organization. Now, I think there are rather split views on this. Clearly, anything which raises awareness of mental health is a good thing. But I think, on the other hand, these initiatives should be welcomed. But I think one has to be very careful that it doesn't become simply a logo that you can put on your website, a way of saying, I'm doing good things, but actually, what are you doing behind the scenes? And I think it was Elizabeth Rimmer, who is the chief executive of Law Care, who was quoted recently as saying that it mustn't become simply a box ticking exercise, that organizations who sign up to it, yes, that's good, but let's see delivery behind that.
So I wasn't aware, but it is clear that we have people in the audience from outside the UK, which is great.
Great.
And so we have a comment from an IP partner from Argentina saying what her firm has implemented there, which is very is fantastic. They have set up working hours from 9 to 6, so there's an expectation that that's the working hours.
Yeah.
Because in the past people used to just stay longer, and obviously that was probably a disadvantage for people with young kids, usually ladies, women that had to leave the office, and so it's probably has helped also mental health in this firm, which is great. It's a good initiative that maybe others could really support.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, I in my profession, yes, I would work long hours. I would do stuff at home. I'd be sending emails late at night, but it leads to pressure. It leads to pressure on oneself. It leads to stress. It leads to burnout. So I think organizations need to be very careful. And I would just throw in one thing, which has struck me as I've thought more about the profession, is the partnership model. And I might be wrong in some instances, but my understanding of the partnership model is that the partners actually run the firm. So although they may have a chief executive who sits outside the partners, ultimately the partners run the organization. And I think the dangers of overworking and stress buildup are just as real for partners as for anybody else. And I would say, who's actually looking at the workload and the working patterns of partners and actually saying to them, look after yourself, look after your own mental well-being. So I think the partnership model in the whole legal sphere can be one which is difficult for people to manage their own working life balance because of the way there's a kind of the management structure is not a conventional management structure. And again, it's one bred of personal experience. That, you know, I don't want to labor what happened to Jonathan, but in the weeks before he sadly took his own life, he'd been on 2 business trips to America, one to the West Coast. He'd then come back, and he then had a client visiting from America. So for 3 weeks, he was, working very intensively, very long hours. And I think that cannot have been a good situation for him to be in, and it's not a good situation for anyone to be in. But nobody was monitoring his working activities because he was a partner. So yeah, I'll leave that thought with partners who may be tuned in.
Yes, yeah, good comment. We have someone else from the audience saying just a comment, not a question, but also retirement can be stressful because suddenly deadlines disappear.
Yes.
So you don't have that actually supports your daily activity, right? But it's an interesting comment that sometimes deadlines actually are nice.
Yeah, I can fully empathize with that myself. I had always planned to retire from my full-time job in 2017, and I'm now working as a consultant in my own area. And certainly, I didn't personally anticipate how much my daily routine revolved around my work activities. And I think particularly in the past year, had I not continued to work as a consultant, had I just stopped and retired, I would have found life very stressful and very difficult. So I think planning a way of leaving the business in a measured and controlled exit plan is very important.
Yes, and how to manage the stress after retirement.
Yeah.
So there's another comment saying that pre-COVID, in this person's firm, there were yoga sessions, which was obviously very well attended and allowed to de-stress.
Yeah.
So that's a suggestion for other firms, right, to implement. But can you talk to us a bit more about what your thoughts are about COVID in general? Because obviously now we are working remotely, we are not so connected, or maybe we are more connected because we have more time, but actually it's through computers and looking at the
Yes.
screen. So it's a very different kind of interaction where it's harder to actually have the real conversations that you are talking about, right? Or it's
Yeah,
easier to
very,
mask.
very, very much more difficult. I think that our guide, which the most recent one we published, was largely written pre-COVID, and so we only were able to write a very short section about COVID because we were really well in the way of publishing it. And I think I would again refer to something that Lawcare wrote about recently. And Lawcare said that they had seen an 80% rise in the number of callers to their helpline seeking support for stress in the past 6 months. And I think they have attributed that to a COVID effect. And I would attribute it to remote working during the pandemic, blurring the boundaries between work and home life on the one hand. I think for those individuals who had to homeschool children and work from home, I think that must have been an incredibly stressful time. I can see you've experienced it. So I think COVID. I think our children are back at school. That's one element that maybe is eased, but I think the whole blurring of boundaries between home life and work life, and the culture of always being able and available to respond to emails and engage in meetings has become much greater as a result of COVID. That people think, well, why can't I have a meeting with people, in Japan at 7 o'clock in the morning? They can sit at home and do it. Why can't they meet with people in Los Angeles at 10 o'clock at night? They can sit at home and do it. So I think this you can sit at home and work. Yes, it has advantages for some people, but it has a lot of points where we need to think carefully about how we manage that blurring of the boundaries.
Yeah, definitely. So I don't know if there are any more questions from the audience. There's one that hopefully it means something to you, but I don't understand. So this person is asking what might be HR, how people might feel about HR tools such as the Bradford factor and how that might impact on the willingness, ability to take time off. Do you know
Sorry,
much
say that
about
again.
the Bradford factor?
I don't think I know. I'd need to have some clarity. Well, let's think about that, and let me read it. And if the individual would like to send me put their email in the line, then I'll respond by email. So I think that maybe that's a good point, just to say that if anyone, I know we've gone on in time, if anyone would like to have questions answered, then I know that SIPMA are making a video recording available. All my contact details will be on the video. Yeah, please get in touch. I think I've said to you what we can do, and I would just say that as a charity, at this point, everything that we help and support organisations with is free at the point of delivery. So if you're a small organisation, we're not suddenly going to send you a bill for £1,500. It's free at the point of delivery at this point in our journey as a charity.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Graham. So, we got another one. So this person is talking about it, how stressful it was, isn't it, and how it was difficult to really switch off, right? So she decided to go back to the office.
Yeah, and I can understand that. I think having a pattern, being in the office for some people, it gives you these more definitive boundaries. So just before everyone goes, I'd like to say how grateful I am to you, Oscar, for taking the time to chair the events. And I'm not sure whether everyone knows, but Oscar also has given his time to be on our advisory board. So as a charity, we're very grateful to you for doing that. And I'm also very grateful to SITMA for their commitment, the commitment of SITMA, and if I could say perhaps more quietly, the commitment of SEPA has been fantastic. Both organisations are a real credit to the profession in the way they've engaged with us, and I'm really grateful. And I'm very grateful to Sarah Vaughan, who has been meticulous in setting this up and has organised it perfectly. And I'd like to say, I know she's not visible to you all, but thank you to Sarah behind the scenes for everything that she's done. Okay, thanks.
Thank you a lot, Graham. Thank you for your time. Very much appreciated. And for everybody to know that this has been recorded and it will be available after the session has finished. Thank you a lot for your time.
Please tell your friends to listen as well.
Of course, and send forward the link. And I hope you have a very good mental health week awareness this week.
Thank you.
Thank you a lot.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks.